I think the time has come to start the meeting. If people want chairs who don't have them, there are some more, or you can get a chair from the cart there. Okay. Good evening and welcome to Stow Candidates Night. My name is Donna Bush and I will be your moderator for the evening. This forum is being sponsored by the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is a grassroots, non-partisan organization. We do not support or oppose particular candidates, but we do work to bring information to the voters and to encourage active participation in the democratic process. I want to thank the people who are taping this. I think we have a few tonight: Robert Putnam, Jonathan Daisy, Linda Stokes, Lou Halpern. I think that's our crew up there, and we can all watch on local cable TV. Maybe they're live streaming. I'm a little yes, they're live streaming tonight. So your friends can be watching you as we speak. We want to thank also our town clerk, Linda Hathaway, who is our timer this evening and is helpful definitely in planning this event. All candidates who are on the ballot have been invited to introduce themselves, to share past accomplishments and visions for their next term if incumbents, or if new, to introduce themselves and their ideas and to answer questions this evening. We're very fortunate to have at least one candidate for every open board position. That's not always the case at this point. And I think it's just wonderful the kind of time that people are willing to put into these volunteer positions, sometimes for years and years, or sometimes for one term and then moving on to other pursuits. We do have one race, and that is for the Neshoba Regional District School Committee. And so that is a race between two people, one of whom is an incumbent and one of whom is a new candidate, and we'll hear from them in the second part of the forum. We will first hear from candidates for non-contested offices. Each candidate has been asked to take up to 3 minutes to introduce themselves and tell us what they hope to accomplish during their term. There will be an opportunity for audience questions after each set of candidates has spoken, and people can ask questions to individuals or to the whole group. And so will Marcia Rising and Maureen Bush come forward to the table, and Laura Reiner and Carol Stoltz is running for library trustee, but she is not able to be here this evening. Yes, this is not a contest because there are 3 open spots, but this is a chance for everybody to tell what their vision is for the library and why they would like to run. And we will start with Maureen Bush.
Good evening. I'm Maureen Bush, and I'm running for a 3-year term on the Randall Library Trustees. I was elected 2 years ago to finish an unexpired term and have decided to run again for a full term because I believe that libraries are an essential part of our community as they are both a hub for learning and a meeting place within the community. The biggest challenge facing the library and its trustees in the next few years will be how to effectively and efficiently serve the community needs with the space and resources we have. In addition to books and periodicals that have always been a part of a library, we now have so many digital forms of media such as DVDs, CDs, electronic books, audiobooks, and also computers, which are a community resource. And with these additional resources, library usage is changing in many ways. The restoration of the historic part of the library, which is currently nearing its end, has given us a lovely new space, well, rejuvenated space for presentations and meetings. However, this restoration has not touched the lower level of the library nor the upstairs where the reference materials are. And as the needs of the library and the community change, we do need to look at that space and determine how to utilize that space best to serve the needs with books and activities so that we will have a vibrant library throughout. The biggest accomplishment of the library in recent years as a whole has been this restoration project. My own personal accomplishment has been working on a subcommittee with the Historic Commission and Historic Society to look at how to display all the historic objects that are in the Whitney Room, which is the 1925 addition to the library. We need to work together to create a lively display of all these historic objects so that they can be an integral part of our library. And I hope that I'll have your vote on Election Day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maureen. We will now hear from our other Laura Reiner, who is a first-time candidate for any office and has been serving on the board when someone had left. Rick Lent, I believe, has left his position, and we thank him for the service that he gave for, I think, several years. And Laura is looking forward to serving a term on the library trustees. Laura.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Reiner. I've lived in Stow since 2004, and I'm running for the one-year term, the unexpired term, on the Board of Trustees. So why am I running? Like everyone in this room, I love Stow, and I volunteered for various activities over the years, but I had a long commute, and I was busy, and I'm tired, couldn't stand much at night. So I always vowed that when I retired, I would really contribute and get more involved, and that day has come. I've retired. And so when I retired, I thought about how I could best contribute to the town, and as a librarian for the past 20 years, I thought, well, working with the library made a lot of sense. I think I can offer some insights from that perspective. I'm a big fan of public libraries in general, but especially Randall Library, and I think for such a small library, it just offers a tremendous range of services. I think it's important that we continue to be the best that we can be given our constraints, making careful use of the budget that we're allotted, but continuing to innovate and meet the changing needs of the town that Maureen spoke about, while still providing that great personal service that we're known for. I think in the coming year, the main issues facing the library will be completing the restoration in the historical part of the library, getting a more detailed sense of how the community wants its library to evolve, and beginning work on a strategic plan for the next 5 years. I think the current plan is drawing to an end. And I don't know a great deal yet about how the board operates and the details of the challenges ahead, but I'm excited to participate. I hope you will vote for me.
Thank you very much, Laura. And now we will hear from Marcia Rising, who has been on the Board of Health for, I'm not sure how many years, but I think she'll tell us, and I think it's great that she's up for another term on the Board of Health and watching over us, trying to help us stay healthy as a community. Marcia.
Thank you. We moved to Stow in 1961, and we've raised our family here, and Stow is our town, and I felt as though I really needed to give back in service somehow. I have a medical science background, and I thought Board of Health might be a good fit. So starting in 1985, I ran for the board, and it's been every term since then, and I really like doing it. The Board of Health in the town is really a very powerful board. We derive our power from the state legislature through mass general laws, and we, as a board, are allowed to adopt and enforce even more stringent regulations than the state has if we see a need to do so. And the state sanitary code covers housing. We cover nuisances, foods, inspections of beaches, camps, sanitary sewage disposal, private wells, infectious diseases, and we've gotten involved with the Medical Reserve Corps now in case of emergencies, whether they're natural or contrived. And there are a lot of concerns that are coming along. There's one here already on opioids. We are now looking at enacting some kind of a marijuana regulation, and this is not easy work. And 3 years ago, the Stow Board of Health voted, with the town's approval, to join the Neshoba Regional Boards of Health. And it has been a wonderful reason for us to do this, because we have access now to people who can help us cover food inspections, do the beaches and the camps, and provide us with a lot of guidance for Title V. And I just really like being on this board and working for the betterment of the town. And it's not going to get any easier either, because the problems that are beginning to crop up are getting tougher and tougher to deal with. So, having said that, I hope you'll vote for me. I'm here to serve, and I should note that the Board of Health is an elected position. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcia. Yeah, you've got a lot of things, a lot of balls in the air, I guess. Now, if the audience has some questions for any of these candidates or all of them, please come to the microphone, identify yourself, and ask your question.
I don't have any questions, I'd just like to thank them.
Yes, that's for sure.
I'd like to thank everyone. I'm Val Pasquantonio Weber. I live on Red Acre Road here in Stow. And I have questions for everybody, but I'll be very brief. For the Board of Health, I'm going to put on my consumer advocacy dentist hat and ask you about how the board and the town made the choice and the decision to allow vaping liquids. As you know, e-cigarettes and vaping are a little bit different. And in our town, we are now selling or have the opportunity to buy vaping liquids that have very large milligrams, up to 60 milligrams of nicotine in them. This is something that is very enticing because it comes in various wonderful flavors for teenagers. The FDA has been involved. All sorts of people, including medical people, are very worried about it. And I was just wondering how the board made the choice that this could happen, or this could be sold in our town, where Maynard, for example, has chosen not to.
We actually did not have anybody come before us directly about vaping, opening a vaping shop. Apparently, this person checked all the zoning, and there was a space available, and he dotted all his i's and crossed all his t's, and was able to become a small retailer here in town. And we were not directly involved with the vaping. Now, having said that, the whole board is violently opposed to vaping, to marijuana, but there are rules and regulations, especially that have come down from the state about marijuana, and we are sort of stuck in the middle here, trying to come up with something that will work for marijuana. And as far as the vaping is concerned, there are age limits for kids to get the stuff, but we all know that somebody has a friend who has a friend who has a friend who can get this material for them. And the kids have a very interesting outlook and have found ways in which to disguise whatever they're doing, whether they're carrying it in their hands as a pen or a thumb drive, when in fact they can just take a whiff. And so I don't have an answer for you. I wish I did. I wish I could say we just shut them down and not allow it, but we cannot do that. And we've had, actually, I don't believe we've had any complaints either, but it is a public health menace.
Thank you for that answer.
Hi, I'm Mark Jones. I have a question for Marcia Rising. Members of the planning board have been concerned for some number of years about what the golf courses put onto their land, because at some point that land is likely to have houses. In fact, one of the golf course owners has had discussions with members of the planning board, or at least staff, about converting some of the land into about 10 houses. What are your thoughts about regulating what the golf courses apply to their land, in light of the fact that there's pretty good possibility people will be drawing water from that land in the future?
Well, it will start with some kind of a plan, a preliminary plan that will appear. We get involved because of septic systems and wells. And if everybody that wants to produce houses on the land has a good enough engineer, they can make a lot of things work. But we review and review and review, and this is where it is very helpful for us to have some really knowledgeable people at Neshoba who can help us look at the plans and determine, if the land is not, the land is owned by someone who chooses to turn it into houses or whatever, then it's, they're entitled to do that. And what we have to do is make sure that whatever goes in conforms exactly to whatever zoning and public health laws that we have in town. And as far as the Board of Health is concerned, as I said, this is septics and wells, and that would be our charge.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Mr. Jones. Any other questions for these candidates?
I'm Jack Zettler, live in Stow. I have a question for Maureen Bush. Maureen, I was asked to tutor at the library some kids, and I really didn't find much of a space dedicated to that. Is there any plan, or is it possible that something more dedicated to a tutoring space would be available at the library in the future?
Well, that is the type of thing we need to look at, how the library is being used. And as Laura said, we need to have a plan that addresses that, and as the demand becomes greater, we will have to address it. Right now, we don't have a plan, but that certainly doesn't mean we'll never have a plan.
Don McFarland, Boxborough Road. I'd like to ask Marcia Rising a question. Trash pickup. I've asked this question before of the board. I'm curious if their thoughts are changing. We have probably 7 vendors at my last count driving around town, mostly on Thursdays, picking up trash. Would it be advantageous for 2 reasons, financially perhaps, to have a contract with one of them? It would save a lot of carbon, I would think. And secondly, would it help the recycling? Because I know some of them don't seem to recycle. There's only one trash bucket in front of the house with everything stuffed in it. That was my first question. Go ahead.
I'm assuming, this is an assumption on my part, but there is a lot of single stream trash collection these days in which everything goes into one bucket and is picked up and then is sorted at the site where the dump truck is emptied.
That includes trash and...
So it includes everything. That's single stream, and there is a lot of it. We happen to have someone who, I have 2 different dumpsters, and one is for recycling and one is for trash, and they go into 2 different trucks. But it just depends on how the business runs it. A lot of them are going to single stream.
What is your thought about perhaps having less trucks going around, one contractor?
Well, it would be lovely if we had less trucks going around. However, at this point, we cannot interfere with people doing business in town. And unless the town were to come to some agreement with someone, have a contract, that maybe we could do it. However, I would tell you that back in the late 80s, early 90s, we discussed that exact thing. And the first year of collection was going to be like $750,000 for the town. And so that did not happen. And it's maybe things have changed now, but I rather doubt it. Trash is big business, and the companies can charge whatever, and we cannot interfere with the way they do business. We do permit them, and we make them, we ask them to tell us the tonnage that they have collected and the recycling tonnage that they have collected, which is always a lot less than regular trash tonnage. But we do license them on an annual basis.
Okay, thank you. One quick question. How is the Devon's recycling working? That's quite a trip, but I guess people are getting over there?
Yes, it's where I went for the very first time, and I had $106 worth of hazardous materials to get rid of, and it was well worth it. And it worked very well. They're very well organized, and the town belongs to the consortium of Devon's, and it takes maybe, half an hour to get there. It's, I think, for the town, it works much better than trying to have a hazardous waste collection day every year and a half or 2 years. And we were serving the same people.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your questions. I think we will move on now to the next group of candidates. Thank you. Next, we will hear from 2 trustees. The someone on the Board of Assessors, and someone running for the Planning Board. If you will all come forward, please. Don Hawks and Tom Ryan here? Yeah, Selectman, I'm sorry, Selectman. Yes, would you come forward also? Yes. A fine group of town volunteers all in a row. You'll have to share your microphones carefully. We'll start with John Colonna Romano, who is running for the 5-year seat on the Planning Board. This position is currently held by Ernest Dodd, who has served the town in this position for 16 years, and he's not running for re-election. We thank Mr. Dodd for his work to help the town plan during a period of significant growth, and I know he's put in a lot of hours and a lot of time. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to be here tonight to stand up and be recognized, but he has done a great job. Mr. Colonna Romano is a voting associate member of the board now, so he has some experience, but this will be the first time he's running for election to the board for a 5-year term. All of the other boards are 3-year terms, but planning is a 5-year term with good reason, because if you're planning, you're kind of having to look ahead quite a bit. So let's hear from Mr. Colonna.
Well, Ernie's a tough act to follow, but yeah, I'm glad he was one who encouraged me to get on the board, and I thank him for his mentoring that he helped me with. So my name is John Colonna Romano. My name is long, but it's easy. As you can see, it never fits. It always has to be thing. But it's a very old Italian name. It goes back more than 1,000 years. But I've lived in Stow for almost 40 years now, up on Boxborough Road. I grew up in New Jersey. I hope you don't hold that against me. And I went to school at the Stevens Institute of Technology. I got a bachelor's degree of science and a master's degree in computer science there. I worked for the federal government for a little while, and then I moved up to Massachusetts to work for DEC. And back then, we called it DEC and not digital, for people who remember back then. And I worked for digital for over 20 years as a software engineer. I was part of a startup company for a little while that didn't do so good, and then I worked a couple other businesses, and now I'm working in a small R&D company that does mostly research work for the federal government as a software architect. So it's given me a lot of experience in engineering activities, how to run big projects, how to do, and also research work where it's very important to try to figure out what's the real problem here, and then what are some innovative solutions to try to address that. And I see that those are important for the planning board. As was just mentioned, about a year ago, when some things were happening in town, and I was getting involved in some hearings and things, and after that I figured that being in town for long enough, it's time that I stop being on the complaining side and try to be on the helping side. So I started going to the planning board meetings, and then was appointed as an associate member, and then later as a voting associate member. So what I see on the planning board is the job is kind of two pieces. One is a tactical piece, where we look at reviewing plans, special permits, and I think there it's really important to be able to listen to everybody and try to understand what the real issues are, try to meet all of the requirements that are in the zoning bylaws, that are in the rules and regulations at the state level, at the federal level, and at the town, and try to do the best we can to mitigate all the issues there are if we decide that the plan can be approved. On the strategic side, I think it's important to look ahead, and again, to look at what are the main issues in the town. I mean, I think there are things there with how do we promote the right kind of businesses that we want in town by providing zoning that makes those businesses more attractive. I think it's important to look at how do we try to promote more affordable housing, because that's an issue in town, and also how do we provide more encouragement for seniors and senior services, because that's where the population is going, and I think the town needs to realize that. And I think that's it. So I'm glad to be able to run for the planning board. It's been exciting and interesting, and I hope I can serve well over the 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Rick Conley, who is on the Board of Assessors. Mr. Conley.
Hi, I'm Rick Conley. I am an incumbent, and I'm running unopposed again for the Board of Assessors. I originally took out papers to run 3 years ago because nobody had taken out papers, and I hate to see that happen in town politics. So I got elected unanimously. I have to admit, I wasn't even in town the day of the election. I was in Florida. Thank God I was unopposed. But I've enjoyed my 3 years. I've learned an awful lot. I did not have any kind of a background in the assessing field. I've had to take courses, pass exams, become certified. I was a firefighter in the city of Boston for 42 years. I grew up in South Boston, and I might add, on the same street as Whitey Bulger. Don't hold that against me. I've lived in the town since 2001, and I love this town. I've been a call firefighter here as well as a paid professional firefighter, and decided it was time to end that association because I was just getting a little too tired of getting in and out of fire engines. So I have a four-letter word that I use to describe what we do in the Board of Assessors, and that four-letter word is fair. All properties are fairly assessed. If you feel as though your property is not fairly assessed, you have a method to file an abatement application, and you can appear before the board, and we listen intently to everybody that does, and we tell you the reasons that we usually turn you down. That's not always true, because we have certainly granted abatements over the years. That's about all I have to tell you, and I'd be pleased to serve another 3 years on the Board of Assessors, which also, by the way, I am on the Conservation Preservation Committee as the liaison from the Board of Assessors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conley. And now we will hear from our selectmen. Although there are two here, they are not in competition with each other. They have the privilege of running unopposed so that they can give another 3 years to the town. And we're very lucky, I think, that they're looking to do that. And we will start with Tom Ryan.
Good evening. How are you all doing tonight? I'd like to thank Kathy and Donna and the entire League of Women Voters for putting on this little shindig tonight, as well as everybody else for being here. I'd also like to thank all the candidates that have come forward. Without these dedicated folks sitting up here with me and prior and the ones coming after, our form of government wouldn't be what it is, which I think is pretty good. My name's Tom Ryan, and I'm running for re-election for the Stow Board of Selectmen. Why? Because I'm committed to and care about the town, the people that live here, as well as the people that work for the town. Having lived in Stow for the last 25 years with my wife and 2 daughters, Stow's become our home, and I want Stow to remain a great place to live. Serving on the FinCom for 9 years, and then the School Building Task Force for 1.5 years, and the last 7.5 years on the Board of Selectmen, I've had the privilege of working with some great people, varied points of view. During the time, we faced a number of difficult issues, but we managed to work through them with respect and dignity. During the last 7.5 years on the Board of Selectmen, I've built on my past relationships with our town departments and boards and continue to do so. Since I've been on the Board of Selectmen, the town has successfully completed the center school project, not that I had that much to do with it. We successfully initiated and completed the fire station and Pompo Community Center, worked out a mutually agreeable arrangement with the Collings Foundation. I also participated in hiring our police and fire chiefs, a number of our police officers. I worked with the Board of Assessors on a solar tax project agreement, as well as quite a few other issues. Going forward, we're going to have our challenges trying to keep the rural character that we love, meeting the needs of a diverse population while monitoring and controlling the tax burden each of us faces. Some of the issues we'll be facing in the next few years will be the retirement of our longtime town administrator, Bill Wrigley, renovations, replacement possibilities for the Neshoba Regional High School, library upgrades, affordable housing, town hall upgrades, as well as the Eversource transmission project. As a selectman, I'll continue to provide leadership, respectfully listen to various points of view, and I won't back away from the tough issues. I'll try to do what's in the best interest of our town. I firmly believe that the people of Stow are entitled to voice their opinions and deserve someone who will deal with the issues head-on. I'm excited about the opportunity that lies ahead for Stow and feel that I can make a positive impact. I hope I've earned your vote or support, and please vote for all these fine folks that have come forward on May 15th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. And now we will hear from Mr. Hawks, who is also running as for re-election to the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you for the League of Women Voters, as Tom has mentioned. This is democracy with a small d at the local level at work. I think Tom has outlined many of the accomplishments of the board. As he said, we have worked well together collegially. I have had the pleasure, or the honor of serving for 2 full terms now, in another month or so. This will be my 3rd term. I've lived in Stow since 1983. Before getting on the board, I was a veterans agent for a number of years, veteran service officer, as it's now called, and served then and previously and again on the Lake Boone Commission, where I've been privileged to live since coming to Stow those many years ago. I'd like to highlight and turn this into kind of a commercial for what you're seeing here tonight, and that is participation in government at all levels. We run the gamut from assessors to zoning board and almost everything in between. We have ad hoc committees that, as Tom referenced, do an excellent job as the need exists for looking at individual finite problems, make recommendations to town meeting, which is our ultimate legislative body, and we have to make the case and justify everything to them. And then they move on to other projects, as well as the continuing involvement of many of the committees. We have, each of the selectmen serves as liaison to various communities, to committees and departments. You've heard Tom mention he is liaison to public service. I, over my 6 years, have been liaison to the Neshoba Regional District School Committee, and at varying times, Conservation and currently Planning Board, Recreation. We swap around on some of those, so we get a good flavor of everything that's going on in town. And what I'd like to give you a plug for is I served as chair for 2 years on the Board of Selectmen, and very frequently during chairman's comments would point out the opportunities to serve. If you went into town hall tomorrow morning and took a look on the 2nd floor, there's probably 20 different positions open on varying committees. We're never at full capacity. We're always looking for volunteers. This system of government would not work for us without that volunteer. I'd just like to highlight one of the biggest challenges I see in the coming term, as Tom referenced, is the retirement of Mr. Wrigley. He's been our one and only town administrator since the charter was adopted. We have a AAA bond rating which is rare as hen's teeth to achieve, and it's not by accident. He works well and with diligence of the various committees and departments to maintain that. And I'd like to give kudos to the school, Neshoba School Committee, for its spirit of cooperation. I think we have, the town administrator, and we will present a budget next week that will be prudent and hopefully will result in a slight decrease in the tax rate. Not the bill necessarily, but the rate. And that is no small accomplishment. We look forward to working cooperatively again with this board and all others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hawks, and thank you to all the candidates. And we will now take questions from the audience. Again, come to the microphone and identify yourself. You can ask the question of one individual or of all the candidates.
No, Ellen, no.
Tom asked me if I was here to grill him, so here I am. Ellen Sturgis, Canterbury Road. So this is, well, first I do want to thank all of you and all the previous candidates for running. It really is nice to see, especially new faces, and I like humor in the Board of Assessors. Good, you know. This Billy Bulger lived on the same street, so that's, you know, he's not in jail, I don't think, not yet, you know, but anyway. Okay, so my question for the selectmen is, one of my frustrations, and it sort of came up actually with Don's question around the trash pickup, because if you calculate those numbers, it would cost a whole lot less than what we're paying individually for households. But my bigger question for the selectmen is around the sort of vision for where Stow is going on some of the bigger issues besides hiring, and we have great staff. But I look around, and, you know, Hudson's been booming, you know, and when we moved to Stow in 1990, you know, Hudson was nothing. And now, you know, it's the place to go. People coming from Boston going to Hudson because they had an economic plan and they've made it happen. Maynard goes up and down, but it's always got restaurants and it's got more and more going on. And Stow is sort of being left behind. So I'm just wondering, how is the selectmen, you guys are the ones to sort of create the long-term vision and plan to help all the other committees figure out how can we work together to put us on the map. We always complain about our tax base, not having enough businesses here, but it doesn't seem like anything changes. So just thoughts, please.
I'll take a shot at that first. It's partly an accident of early development before there was much zoning. A lot of the businesses that are in Stow and, in Hudson and Maynard, where they have a very developed downtown area, as well as the commercial areas. And second part of that is, it's a conundrum, because people come to Stow because we are the way we are. What do people say? I moved here because we have golf courses and apple orchards and river and a lake, and anytime you suggest, well, maybe we should try to get some heavier development in here, or where it really isn't what people are here for. At the same time, having said that, I think there are some positive developments for our very limited opportunities. We were very successful in getting one of the largest grants in town history for lower village improvements, which is, you drive through there now, you'll see the beginning of some construction work that's going on for traffic improvements. The planning board has, and this is, as much as everybody says, well, the selectmen have all this authority. You know what we do best? We sign papers. If you ever watch us on a Tuesday night and shuffling papers back and forth, signing one-day liquor licenses and used car licenses, that's what we do best. We love to give autographs. But I think that you will see some revitalization down there with the town, where we have cooperated, providing a well space for the south side of 117 Great Road. That we're very hopeful that once water comes in, you'll be able to get some new businesses and expansion of current businesses down there. So I think we work with there's an economic development commission that's as well. I think that we are there to push policies once committees establish them. If committees come to us with recommendations, we certainly listen to them. We advocate for them at town meeting. Town meeting has the ultimate decision, but thank you for the question and voice your interest.
For those of you that don't know, Ellen was a former selectman also, so she's been dealing with this for a while and probably thinking about it. I thank her for her service when she did that. And for others who don't know, she was also instrumental in getting Center School, our new Center School built. And she put her blood, sweat, and tears into that. But I digress. One of the big things that we have a problem with here in Stow is that we have very little public water. That has slowed down a lot of the development just up by the lower village. Shaw's, that development has their own water supply, so they can do a few things up there. But without a public water supply, which ever since I've been involved in town politics for the last 20 years, there has been very little desire to change that. Part of it is because of the expense that we would end up going through. Right now, we have, and I think Rick would probably back me up on this, but we've been decreasing in the amount of commercial development that we have in town. We've got, it used to be about 90% housing and 10% commercial, and I think it's decreasing.
Yes.
So we are really a bedroom community, and we've been discussing that, the type of things that we could do to try to get more development in here, but because the surrounding towns have the infrastructure and they have vacant space, nobody really wants to move in here as far as commercial development. So we're darn lucky to have the ones that we do, and hopefully we won't lose them.
Can I make a-
Thank you.
can I
Yes,
make a
would you
comment on
like
that?
to?
So I just wanted to add that the planning board and the planning department is sponsoring a small market research effort to look at what kinds of things might be doable in the lower village. And then the result of that would then get fed into, are there any zoning changes that we might make to encourage the kinds of things that people might want in town?
Thank you. Rick, did you want to speak to that or pass it by?
No, well, to speak to Tom's point, the percentage of commercial space is lowered, but because the residential numbers have grown. As you look around, you see down there, we have a vacant restaurant that's been vacant for going on 15 years, I think, and a gas station that's been vacant for about, I'm taking a wild guess here, 8 years or so. And those are negative aspects to me, to somebody coming into the town to open a business. Although we've had people entertain a possible business opening at that gas station. But it all goes back to water. Water is the bottom line. I mean, when they moved out west, out to California, why did they stop at these certain, and build a town somewhere? Because there was water available, right? It's definitely in my eyes, the most detrimental item to keep businesses from coming into this town.
Thank you. We have another question?
Yes, Val Weber. I happen to live on Red Acre Road, so I'm asking this question. Thank you for the new lower village and the possibilities of getting more business. That's great. I'm very intrigued that the Cornelius land is now bubbled up to the top with its aquifer and its possibility of a low-income housing. Now, where are we with that? Is that sort of pie in the sky that we are hoping, or is this reality?
Well, if you're planning on coming to town meeting, you'll hear all about it. As some of you may know, quite a few years ago, I won't hazard to guess how many, 15 years ago, the town was going to buy that piece of property, and I'll leave it to say that it didn't work out, but we were going to pay around $1.2 million, $1.3 million, something like that for it. Right now, 15 years later, against all thoughts of property going up, we're going to have a chance of buying it for about $450, something like that. And what we're doing is we're going to be using, or we're proposing, is a partnership between the Conservation Commission and Stow Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, where the majority of the property that is, I'll say, less than buildable would go to conservation with an ability to put wells on it in the future, and a chunk of it would go to affordable housing. And the neighbors appear to be on board with it. It's a reasonable piece of property to build on, and it looks like a win all the way around. So if you come to town meeting, you'll hear all about it.
I would just add kudos to Mike Kopczynski and his diligence for sticking with this all these years, and I really hope that this comes to pass. That there is a perfect number of units proposed for that property, which is 6, which you will hear at town meeting. You'll hear the concepts and why that will work the way it will. And I certainly hope that it has, because one of the things that has been noted in from our master plans and going back a long time is the lack of affordable housing for town employees or people who are aging out of their larger houses but still want to stay in Stow. So we have a crying need for this, not just because the state says we have an arbitrary 10% goal we should reach, but for real human interest and supporting folks that want to stay in town.
Thank you. We have another question, Mrs. Rising.
It's more of a comment than a question. I hear you when you talk about the lack of public water supply, but there's another side to that coin, and that is public sewers. And those two things together are what drives the town of Maynard and the town of Hudson to be able to do what they're doing, and prevents the town of Stow from being a little more forward-thinking. But maybe something will happen.
And you're absolutely right. I was just thinking water in, water out, water.
Yeah, yeah, remember the water out part.
Right. And that's actually probably the more critical one,
It is.
because with having private septic systems here in town, we can't put some of the things in our water that would be filtered out by a treatment plant. So you're absolutely correct. Thank you.
Does anyone else have a burning question? Okay, thank you to all of our candidates. And now we will hear from our 2 candidates who are running for the 1 3-year term on the Neshoba Regional School District Committee. Mark Jones and Elaine Sanfilippo.
Yeah, you got it. Good job.
I've been practicing the name. And we will start with Mr. Jones to give, we've said 4 to 5 minutes to these candidates for their opening statements.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing this event, and thank you to everybody else who is running for office. I know there's a lot of hours devoted to helping this town work, and I've certainly participated in that, so I recognize what it takes to accomplish things in our humble town. A little background for me. I've been living in town for about 13 years. I have been working in small businesses and nonprofit organizations for about 35 years, mostly in the financial end of the world, whether that's an accountant or controller, operations manager, one of those things, doing tax preparation, financial advising for people who have assets to invest. So that's one of the primary things that I can bring to the town as well as to the school committee, somebody who's familiar with how a lot of those things operate and how to pay attention to thinking about that well. In terms of town government, I started in as an associate to the planning board in 2011 and continued until 2014, in which I was an elected member. I stepped down from being elected there to join the school committee, and I remain an associate member of the planning board since. So I'm not able to attend always, but at least to the extent I can, I'm up to date on the activities that they do. The reason I am running is I would like to continue a number of tasks that have not been completed that our present school committee has started, that we have, in a lot of ways, we're taken a very wide-ranging look at the operations and finances of the school committee, and we have some practices, but we don't yet have policies and protocols in place. So there are lots of things that we've learned, and we'd like to inform future school committees by being able to get those policies in place, and that might include some bylaws to guide the school committee itself and how it organizes itself. I'd like to bring a lot of our financial processes into wider view. As for one of the accomplishments that we've had in this recent school committee is that the Budget and Warrant Committee didn't really do any budgeting. And so a lot of the activity that went into creating a budget only occurred after the full budget was presented to the school committee, and then they would deliberate on it. So there wasn't a lot of pre-vetting of the information and the thinking that went into that budget. So that is one of the continuing things I'd like to see, and see that expand so that's more visible to both parents and taxpayers before the full budget is presented. So what are some of the accomplishments that took place with the school committee during my watch? I think one of the most important things was that we elected to not renew the contract of the superintendent who existed. In my view, he had lost credibility with me and many of the town leadership, and it was time really to have somebody that really had credibility in the things that he said. We hired an outstanding superintendent who was an associate commissioner to the Board of Education and also has previously been a superintendent in Ashfield and Winchendon. So she had seen lots of varieties of challenges as a superintendent and really understood how to help an organization to pick itself by its bootstraps and run in a unified direction. And I'm seeing that right now, that she really understands how to change the culture of an organization. Another accomplishment is that we asked for, as a school committee, a review by the Massachusetts School Business Officials, MASBO, and also by an auditing organization, a forensic audit. And we received 2 reports that guided us about ways to improve our financial operations as well as to modify our operations for the future. So another thing that we as a school committee have done is we changed our auditors and we have a new fresh look at the operations. So I think all of those things speak to a modified group of people who really understand that there's some very important financial things that go on to the very important activity of giving the best education possible with the resources we have to our children and our youth. The major issues that are forthcoming for the school committee: we have a high school that is a mongrel of 3 different ages, 1960, 70, 80, and 2000. We have a major capital event that's going to happen sometime in the next coming years that we need to both help the members of our district to understand what the challenges are and also to figure out a way to finance that challenge. I think further, in general, our budget is a challenge to meet for at least one of our towns, which just barely missed having an override this year. That's Lancaster. Bolton has its own challenges. They have the proportions of their town are the 3rd highest in the state between business and residential taxes. So there's a lot of complaint there about taxes. So figuring out how to balance our need and the resources we have is a challenge of any board, and I think it is one of the very most important challenges of our board, and being able to do so in a way that people understand that everything is a trade-off, that somewhere you have to do the best you can and then figure out how you have the resources necessary to do that. I think that summarizes it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Ms. Sanfilippo?
Very good. It's Sicilian. I know it's tough. Well, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for having us and putting on this event tonight. I want to thank everyone up there recording and everyone volunteering their time. And thank you to everyone who came tonight or will watch later. An informed electorate is so important to our civic process, so thank you for taking that responsibility seriously. My name is Elaine Sanfilippo. I grew up not far from here in Leominster, where both of my parents were public school teachers and my grandfather was a city councilor. I've lived in Stow for 4 years with my husband, our 2 kids, ages 3 and 1, and our dog. At the end of the day, everyone who cares about our schools wants the same thing: to educate our children and foster their long-term success. I am a passionate believer that public education can fight rising inequality, and I am running because I think that there's more that we can do to prepare our students for productive, healthy, and happy lives. I believe we should think about education holistically, with a focus on delivering academic, social, emotional, and physical long-term health in a fiscally responsible way, through delivering a balanced and well-rounded system, which includes both college prep and vocational education. Our students will be better prepared for the future. My professional and community experience, long before we ever moved to Stow, has prepared me to be well qualified for this role. I started my journey towards civic service as a kid, cleaning out kennels at animal shelters. I served on the student council in high school, and I led the new student orientation program in college. As an adult, I've volunteered with many groups. I've served on the board of directors of a nonprofit helping women and children in Kenya, and even started a fundraising company for dog rescue efforts called Wiggly Butt Designs. I volunteer in my child's classroom, and this year I started helping teachers apply for awards or small grants to help them get additional funds for their classrooms. I understand that sometimes you have to look beyond taxes for new sources of revenue. It takes a lot of work, but it is worth it. Professionally, my experience and skill set align well with what is required to be a school committee member. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in biomedical engineering from WPI. I began my career finding patterns hidden within vast quantities of data as a clinical trials analyst. From there, I attended MIT's Sloan School of Management for my MBA. Having both a technical and business background gives me the ability to see the big picture and to dig into the smallest details. I understand the need to prepare students for a changing world while operating within realistic financial constraints. I have worked for large demanding companies, including Oracle, Samsung, and Apple, and when a company like Apple says, here's $10 million and a 3-month deadline, you meet that deadline and you do not go over budget. You plan well, you get creative, you flag risks, you do a lot of talking to the stakeholders, and you just figure it out. I will put all of these same skills to work on the school committee, knowing the children in our entire community is depending on it. As a parent of young students, I would bring a unique perspective to the role. None of our 3 school committee members from Stow have elementary-age children. I believe diverse perspectives enable the most robust debate and ultimately the strongest long-term policy decisions. As a taxpayer, I also want our money used as efficiently as possible. Only with a strong vision for what we want our schools to be in the future can we direct our priorities and ultimately our funds. Every dollar should tie directly back to our long-term vision. To get there, we need to truly listen to the community about their concerns, ideas, wants, and needs. I vow to be a voice for the community in that regard and to contribute to a collaborative environment. It would be an honor and privilege to be elected as a steward of public education in our district. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to discussing more this evening.
Thank you to both of our candidates. And again, this is the race. We have 1 seat for 2 candidates, so we're very fortunate to have a little competition here. And do we have questions for these candidates?
John Colormano, Boxborough Road. So I understand that there is some amount, and I don't know the details, of an unfunded retirement for teachers. So what's the plan to deal with that going forward? Is that true? Is there?
Yes, there's something called other post-employee benefits, basically retiree health insurance. We're required to have an actuarial report every 2 years. The last one in 2015 showed that our liability is $40 million. That was not funded. This is something that the previous superintendent said that we don't have to deal with. Well, this is one of the reasons I wanted him to depart. One of the things, several things that the school committee has done is that we have established a trust to fund in order to set aside money. And we have actually, for the first time, put a line item into the budget to start funding that. The annual liability that we're not funding, meaning the amount that we could or should be, is more than $1 million a year. So in that sense, the high school budget, the district budget is a deficit budget of $1 million because that $40 million is increasing by that $1 million every year. It's my hope that over time that the district funds that by incrementally increasing that annual amount. Perhaps in 5 to 10 years, we'll be paying $500,000 towards that fund so that it's not racing out of our control. If we were to fund it all the time, say in 10 years and then fully from then on, the problem would take care of itself over the next 30 years or so. So it's not a quick thing and it's not going to go away. But it's also something that every municipality is in trouble for because they've been ignoring it for the last 3 decades.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Elaine, did you want to speak to
Yeah,
that?
definitely. So the General Accounting Standards Board made a change a couple of years ago. Previously, the requirement was to report the cost of retirees' future health care just for the expenses that would be occurred that year. And what they changed the standard to was that we needed to report the cost of expenses for the future years, even though we need to report the cost of the benefits for the entire time the benefits would be around, not just the money that would be leaving the budget for the current year. So obviously, under the new standards, that's a much bigger number because you're talking about benefits promised over the course of maybe 30 years, not necessarily the money that's actually going out the door annually. So it's a big change, and I think for visibility and transparency purposes, it is the right thing to do. But I just want to be clear that we don't need to spend $34 million next year. That would essentially be prepaying for retirees' health care benefits for the next 30 years. We're not going to do that tomorrow. I think the bigger issue that it raises is the cost of healthcare coverage. I think everybody in this room can relate to that issue because it's something that everyone struggles with personally. It's something that every town, school district, state, even our entire country is dealing with right now. And nobody has really a good answer to it. I mean, I definitely think that we made these commitments and we need to honor these commitments to our current retirees and our future retirees. But it's something that is going to take a lot of work over the long term to fix. And so what I tell people, honestly, is that if you want to make the biggest impact in reducing that liability, go advocate for healthcare reform at the state and federal level, because that'll make the biggest impact.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I have basically 2 questions. I know the focus has been on finance, but I'm going to ask a question. Does the school committee have any influence on the actual curriculum or not? That's a question.
Ms. Sanfilippo, would you like to take that first?
Sure. I mean, the school committee really is an advisory and oversight role. We're not really supposed to get involved in the administrative operations day to day. However, a big part of what they do is hiring, creating a contract or not renewing that contract for the superintendent. And the superintendent really should be the visionary leader for where we are headed. That being said, I think that every member of the school committee does bring their own opinions about the future of education and where we should be headed as a district. And I think those opinions inform every decision that we make. I personally think that we need to strengthen and clarify our long-term mission about what it is we actually want the schools to be moving forward, because there's a lot, our world is changing, and our world is being, the economy is being disrupted in major ways, and so what we educate our children to be when they become adults is changing, and it's so important. I personally think that memorizing facts in a textbook is probably less of a priority because of the instant access to information that we have, but teaching them critical thinking, flexible thinking, how to adapt to change because their world is changing fast, keeping creative thinking, how to be informed, why it's important to be informed, all those kind of softer, harder to teach and harder to educate skills are actually where we needed to be headed. So as a school committee member, that would be where my focus would lie in terms of asking questions of a potential superintendent candidate or talking about priorities within our budget. So I would say it's sort of an indirect influence there, but it certainly affects your day-to-day and on the decisions that you'd be making.
Okay. What prompted my question was that I'm a little disappointed that we no longer teach civics in our high schools. And when I talk to young people, they have absolutely no idea, many that have no idea how our government works. And I think years ago they used to teach civics, if I'm not mistaken. But I've talked to people that are interested in this, and they agree that civics is something that should be taught in our high schools. And that was prompted my question. So,
Thank you. Mr. Jones, did you want to add anything to this? Or?
Sure. It is a statutory mandate that there be American history, so perhaps that was the place that civics appeared in most curriculums. I actually don't know what our curriculum is at the high school on that topic. School committees tend not to take a deep or particular focus on curriculum. The indirect means that they participate is often through the budget, as in we are going to fund this level or this kind of courses, or we're not going to fund this particular position or that position. That's the particular way that school committees tend to get involved with curriculum. Our district does have a department that is under the superintendent for curriculum and education that guides all of the schools to have a unified and aligned curriculum. One of the discussions we've had in the last few months is to define a position for the assistant superintendent and trying to specify in the job description sufficiently so that we have a sense that that person is able to bring their leadership in a way to the digital world, the digital side of the world, integrating that into the curriculum as opposed to using a computer like a pencil to really make it an active part of the curriculum. So we'll hear more about that if and when that person is hired and what their activities are as time passes, I think. One of the things I've seen on the statewide email list is that actually very few school committees take a thorough review of the curriculum in any kind of fashion. So it's an interesting aspect that much of that is really delegated to the superintendent, and it's incidentally looked at in terms of review of the superintendent or the review of the job descriptions that the school committee is able to authorize.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Can I say just a quick thing about civics? So the state did pass a requirement for civics to be a requirement for graduation. This is fairly new, it happened this year. But what they haven't done is define what that requirement means. I don't know if it'll be handed down by the state or if we will have an opportunity to shape what that requirement is. But if so, it's a great opportunity for people to get involved and really have a say in what that requirement should be.
Thank you. Ms. Sturgis?
And I just have to add, the 8th grade social studies teacher, Kevin Keaveney, does an amazing job of teaching kids civics by doing role-playing in the Supreme Court. What was the other one they did? Who remembers? What's the other one? House of Representatives. So the kids actually literally take on the roles for several days and dress up as judges, and it's really so there is some good stuff happening in our schools. So, but that's not what I was, though related question, sort of. Yes, as Tom mentioned, I was on school committee just a few years after what some of you will remember is the nightmare of Neshoba School District when we went into inches away from receivership because of poor financial management. And one of the responses was to hire assistant superintendent for finance, who actually was the acting superintendent at one point, and then after we hired the new superintendent, had a acting assistant superintendent of finance. So both those positions, or the assistant superintendent for finance was let go and has not been replaced. And as someone who's been in finance for most of my career, I worry that the person who's currently in the acting position, which I believe is going on 2 years, is basically trained as a controller, not as a finance person. So I worry, and I guess I ask you both is to comment on the choice to have assistant superintendent for curriculum, and I'm not sure exactly what the title is, curriculum and education, when that's the background of our current superintendent, and not have an assistant superintendent for finance, given our history and how important that role is.
Mr. Jones, do you want to comment on that?
I think we have the equivalent of assistant superintendent for finance now. The current financial manager, financial and business manager, had 2 people hired below her. So in a sense that her job was elevated by having more assistants. So that's one perspective that I have on that. In terms of her presence, I think it was a benefit to have her continuity by retaining her and keeping her in place. And I think the fact that she is an interim financial leader, business manager, speaks to that that's going to be a continuing, the position is going to be reviewed in a continuing way as the superintendent continues with her settling her middle management crew.
Mrs. Sanfilippo, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we should be striving for balance in all aspects of our system. So we talk a lot about the students being well-rounded and having a balanced education. We talk a lot about balancing our finances with investment in schools versus the financial realities that money is a finite resource. The school committee itself, I think, the pendulum has swung pretty strongly from having no one with financial experience to in recent years focusing almost solely on the financials. And I think the same should be true of the administration. Because the administration works so closely with the school committee in developing the budget, it needs to come from both sides. And I think that I've worked in technology, and there's a saying, garbage in, garbage out. So we can have the best reporting, the best oversight, the best advisory process that we can, but if the information that's coming in isn't well visualized or accurate or consistent, then it doesn't really matter how much advisory or oversight that we have. So I do think it's important to have someone at a very high level really being like a CFO that's kind of in charge of the financial aspect. If I was starting from scratch in an ideal world, I think I would choose the superintendent to be kind of a visionary leader, curriculum, kind of the person that gets everyone on the same page and drives us all forward together, and have an assistant superintendent, sort of like the operational nuts and bolts and finance person, because they operate largely behind the scenes, whereas the superintendent is really the face of the educational system. But I think that we have to currently work with the abilities and specialized skill sets of the people we have now. So the job description for the assistant superintendent was approved this week at the school committee meeting. So it looks like we will be hiring someone, and if elected, the school committee would be involved in an advisory and consent role with that hiring process. So that would be definitely something that I would keep in mind.
Thank you. And we have 2 more people at the microphone. And
Don Hawks, Dawes Road. I'm asking a rhetorical question. Do either one of you have an elephant gun? Because there's an elephant in the room, which no one has mentioned so far, or only very briefly in passing. And that is the implications of filing the statement of interest with the state regarding the high school. I was on the Space Needs Task Force. I know that there are needs and perhaps reallocations in science labs and what have you. My concern is that during that process, we reviewed some data that showed regional school districts, so I think the number was 15 over a period of some years, that had filed, much as we have now, and said to the state, come in and please evaluate, and instead of the communities driving, the state drove the bus. And I think in some number like 11 of the 15 suggested that high schools should be replaced. Start over again. And Concord was one of those towns, and I think they spent about $110 million, something like that, for a school that's comparable to the enrollment that we would have. Can you imagine what something like that would do to us, to the three communities struggling now with some of the highest tax rates? Just real quickly, I went to an elementary school in Belmont in the 1940s. That building was there. My father went to that same school in about 1910. That building is still there. It's a 3-story building. Can you imagine anybody building a 3-story building now and saying, kids got to walk upstairs? Heavens, no. The point is, why can't, I am just terrified of the, of the prospect of X years from now going to town meeting with plans rolled out for a new high school. We are constrained physically for a lot of aspects by prior decisions on that property, which would probably mean relocating not just the building, but the property as well. I'd just like to have your thoughts on how you might try to insist on renovations. There's got to be ways to do that rather than let this spiral out of control. Thank you.
Mr. Jones, do you want to speak to that?
There are some real problems with the high school. One of the hardest ones to deal with is that the roof has been leaking in various places for possibly decades, and this is causing allergy problems for some of the kids that are there. And for a problem like that, it is so difficult to deal with, it almost comes to the point that you just have to take down the building and put up a new one. And I don't really have a solution for that particular problem, but I know that that's a very difficult one. There are aspects of the building that were built on the cheap each time it was built in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. There are walls that are not insulated. Some of the classrooms are extremely small. You can only fit 20 people in them. Because of the changes in special education, a lot of classrooms and administrative rooms got cannibalized, and so they ate up classroom space. So there are 3 major possibilities and perhaps a bunch of other hybrid possibilities. One is to renovate and expand the district by improving the common utilities, whether that's the roof and the heating, and maybe have modular classrooms. You sort of treading water there for a year or 5 until you figure out what is the next step. Is your population in the district going up or down? A second choice might be adding a wing and then dealing with some of your infrastructure, which would be the heating and the ventilation. And then 3 is a whole new high school. So I think that is really the question that needs to be investigated in the studies, and I don't really have a particular point of view on that, except that we need to figure out how to come up with a decision that's sustainable. Now, high school generally our reimbursement rate with the MSBA is about 48%. Probably ultimately we'll only get 40. So taking Concord as an example, a $100 million high school, if it came to that, we'd be owing $60 million. So debt service on that would probably be somewhere around $2.5 million a year. So that's likely on the on the higher side what we might be looking at in terms of decisions. And it's hard to know whether the other decisions are cheaper in the long run. I think even our own center school committee had some points of view about whether it was worthwhile to renovate rather than to rebuild parts of the old school, and whether that could have been done differently or not.
Thank you. Mrs. Sanfilippo, would you like to?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so it's been 2 years since the Space Task Force gave its recommendations, but what we have not done in those 2 years is a full-scale needs assessment for the infrastructure and for the physical needs of the building. Like Mark said, the roof has been leaking probably for 20 years. Kids are wearing coats in classes, and we actually have to run the heat overnight in order to keep the pipes from freezing. So things like that, one, they cost extra money. It's actually very expensive to not fix the problem. But also, these are health and safety concerns, so I think that we need to address them in some form. So I would say first, let's get a full-scale needs assessment in there. Let's get architects and construction managers and people that know what it takes to renovate or build a school in there to tell us what exactly we need. I think only then can we even talk about whether we repair something, whether we renovate, whether we rebuild, because those are more based on financial decisions. I do think that we need to look at total cost of ownership and not just what an initial outlay of funds would be. Because I think, honestly, if we had taken care of some of these problems over the past 20 to 30 years, we wouldn't be in this position now. But we all kind of said, well, we don't really have the money, we'll put it off another year. We don't really have the money, we put it off another year. And it's a lot cheaper to maintain anything or to fix small issues than it is to turn around something that's failing. And I think that goes for both curriculum and facilities. So I think that in some form we need to address it, and the first step of that is to do that needs assessment, look at the numbers, look at the requirements, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you. We'll take this question and your question, and then I think we will end the evening.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Mark Grumman, and I live on Elmridge Road. And my original question was going to be in regards to a digital curriculum, but based on the response from previous questions regarding the fact that the committee isn't directly involved in setting up the curriculum, I'd just like to make a quick comment in that regard. I'm fortunate enough to run the Lego Club at the Randall Library that some of you have heard of, that has been very successful recently. And I owe a lot of gratitude to the Second Century Fund, which has donated some robotics kits. And all of the kids that come have a chance to not only build Legos, but actually learn robotics and computer programming, and are doing so successfully as young as 4 years old, including my son. And so it is my sincerest hope that whoever is the member of the school committee, when you have the opportunity to hire someone who is directly involved in establishing a curriculum, particularly digital curriculum, that you think you advocate for a candidate that wants to promote that at a very young age, because experience shows us time and time again that young minds really are capable of this if they're presented with the appropriate opportunity and an age-appropriate curriculum. So please take that into consideration. In regards to that, then, in lieu of that, my question to you is, there's obviously, it's a bit of a unfortunate topic that we have to discuss, but the notion of a resource officer has recently been then used in regards to all of the tragedies that have happened. And so my question is, to both of you, what is your position on that? Is that an appropriate position to staff? At what age or grade levels should that be staffed? And what should be the role of that individual at those grade levels? Thank you.
Mrs. Sanfilippo?
Sure, that's a great question. There's a lot to unpack there. I do think that we need to be realistic about the world that we live in today, and that we need to take every precaution we can with our children, because we're talking about children here. I think at the elementary school level, they have done a good job making not a resource officer, but a policeman that comes into the school more of just a community member. Hey, here's a friend that might be walking around talking to the kids, but keeping it very lighthearted and positive. And I think that's really important. The center school also has the benefit of being a relatively new building, and it was built in the age of these issues, where we do have locked doors all the time and an intercom system where you can see directly from the office to the front doors, and things like that I think do make a big difference as deterrents. The middle school and the high school have different issues because they're older facilities and some of those infrastructure pieces aren't in place. So I do think it's important maybe to have a resource officer or someone around with that kind of specialized skill. I do not believe in arming teachers. If you were implying that in the question, I'm absolutely against it. I think it's kind of a ridiculous idea. And I would never go that far, but I do think that we need to be considering the safety of our students and having things like plans in place. I think we need to practice at the elementary school. I have kids that young, so it hits me personally. I'm not sure that that's a good idea. But with the older kids, I do think we need to practice and make them aware of the types of things that could happen while still providing the social and emotional supports where it doesn't become anxiety-driven or something that is detrimental to their well-being while they're at the school. So in 90 seconds, I think that's the best I can do, but I'm happy to talk about that more after.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
The high school does have a resource officer that's there during the school's operating hours, and I think that's appropriate. That was originally half-time, and I think over the last 3 years it's became full-time and became part of the district's costs. The other schools we do have relationships with each of our towns' police departments, and they do have assigned people to basically be the community resource to those schools, or the regular face that those staff people may see, and I think that's appropriate. I can't say that I think it's appropriate to bring a police officer into all of our schools, but I think it is appropriate for us to have good relationships and have good understandings between the police department and the schools so that everybody knows what everybody thinks and knows what they have to offer to each other. I think that's about the limit of what I have to say about the topic.
Thank you. And we'll take one more question.
My name is Kim Karn, and I live on Bradley Lane in Stow. One of the things that I noticed when I was looking at the forensic audit is that we're chronically over budget in terms of out-of-district placements for special education. And so to the tune of, I want to say, for the forensic audit, it was 2014 to 2016. In 2016, it was $2.4 million that was going out for out-of-district placements. Less offsets was like $1.8 million. What do you see us doing to try to keep our kids in district, those that have special education needs, rather than paying $2.4 million in a year to have them go out of district?
Mr. Jones?
One of the most helpful things on that topic would be to have a high school that has sufficient space so that we can attend to the educational needs of the special ed folks in the most appropriate way, and perhaps even have the opportunity to bring people from outside the district to have enough size to have a specialist, as opposed to sending kids off to the Assabet Collaborative to have enough population come together for a specialist to be affordable and useful. So one of the topics there is just space, and appropriate space to fill the need. The superintendent did bring up the idea for the postgraduate special ed kids. This is people who are older than your ordinary high school kid, that there could be a transitional opportunity for them if we had if we actually rented separate space for them to make it possible for them to begin transitioning into a life that is not a school environment. And I haven't actually heard any further about that possibility, but it certainly is one that's being considered. And as for the younger grades, I think we do run into similar difficulties in terms of space and specialists, and if we have, unusual needs compared to what we have to offer, it, fortunately or unfortunately, is appropriate to send those kids to a place where the specialist is available and can really aid those kids. So it's a challenge for everybody, both the district and the families that have kids with unusual needs. So it's a challenge to do so economically and yet effectively.
Thank you. Mrs. Sanfilippo?
Yeah, that's a great question. So based on the numbers that you said, I think that's about 4% of our budget annually that we're spending to send students out of district because we can't service their needs in-house. And that's a lot. I think that we should be auditing the out-of-district placements and really all of our programs periodically to understand why these kids have to be sent out of district in the first place. I think that if we did that, we would find patterns. and places where we could proactively improve our curriculum, our programming, our services, so that we could serve a larger number of those kids in-house. I think that we'll also find better ways to service all of our students across the population if we did that as well. And that would likely, one, save us money because we wouldn't be sending them out of district and we'd be disseminating better educational experience across a wider range of students. But it also would help families that I'm sure want to keep their kids in the community that they live in and give them a better educational experience there. Just one broader point on special education that I think it's important to bring up that's kind of related is that I think we tend to get stuck in special education and general education as two different silos. We separate them, when really we should be doing the opposite. I think research is showing more and more that what is good for special education services in a lot of areas, particularly in like learning disabilities, it's good for everyone. And I think we need to be auditing things like that to see where can we help special education needs, but also help the general population, because we talk a lot about inclusion and we say that's a stated priority. But I think that we could be doing more to kind of integrate the programming between special ed and gen ed to benefit all of our students. And again, that would save money by disseminating across more students. So.
Can I follow up?
Okay.
I believe somewhere between 10 and 12% of all of our students have what's called an individual education program. So you might conceive of that as special ed, but it's basically having education in which you get particular of your need met, and those kids are often mainstreaming, maybe just one particular class or one particular aspect of their learning environment that needs particular attention. So in that sense, the district does mainstream all of its special ed kids to the best of their ability and with their current staffing and current facilities needs.
Thank you. Thank you for all of your questions, and our candidates now have the opportunity for a 2-minute closing statement. And Mrs. Sam Filippo, would you like to start?
Thank you. I am running for school committee because I believe that there's more that we can do to prepare students for productive, healthy, and happy lives. Through delivering a balanced and well-rounded educational system like we talked about tonight, our students will be better prepared for the future. I have served on a board of directors for a nonprofit and understand the responsibility of advisement and oversight. My background in finance and long-term strategic planning can improve upon recent financial transparency efforts to get to a place of fiscal strength. I am also a parent with a vested interest in the success of our schools, which will provide balance to our decision-making process. The past several years have brought significant turmoil and turnover to the district. It is time that we come together, develop a shared vision, and drive the district forward. I believe that my energy and dedication to the mission of our schools will contribute to progress and move toward a shared prosperity in our community. I look forward to working with the other school committee members, Neshoba administration and staff, our town government, and directly with the residents of Stow to address our current and future challenges and ultimately drive our schools forward. There were a lot of great questions tonight. We did have a time limit, which I totally understand, but I didn't even scratch the surface of a lot of the issues that we discussed. So if anyone wants to chat more afterwards or discuss over email, I am very happy to do so. So thank you for your consideration tonight, and please remember to vote on May 15th.
Mr. Jones?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to answer your questions and to hear my perspectives. I would like to continue to be on the school committee. I think I have several things to offer. One is my diverse experience, both financially and operationally, with small and large organizations. One of the things that I did during my time on the school committee so far is to reach out to our town leadership, our finance committees, and our selectmen to help convey the issues that we are facing so that it's to improve what was perceived as a significant amount of non-communication. And I think that's been very helpful for both finance committee and the selectmen to understand where we're headed and understand the kinds of issues that we face. And I would hope to continue that kind of thing. Similarly, I see that because of the high school issue, that we need to do a similar kind of outreach to all of the district citizens, parents, and taxpayers, as well as town leadership. And I think that is one of the leading challenges that we have as a school committee, and I look forward to the opportunity to hear out people's concerns on that score. So I invite you to think of me and to vote for me at the coming election. And if you would like to reach out to me, if you have further questions, my cards are in the back, and you can contact me that way. Thank you.
Thank you to both of our candidates. And our town clerk would like to just remind you when and where to vote.
Yeah, minor details, right. Linda Hathaway, your Stow Town Clerk. So town meeting is next Monday at the Hale School at 7. I expect that we'll probably go 2 nights. And then the election will be the 15th at Center School in the Music Wings. So we're in the front part of it. For those of you who are familiar with the older part of the school, we're in the front part of the building. And the polls are open 7 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Thank you, Linda.
Oh, and just one last thing. If you're going to be out of town and you can't make it to the polls, get your absentee ballots. We have them. Have them all ready to go.
Great. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to the candidates. And I think that we've seen a wonderful show of what the volunteers can do in the town of Stow. And this concludes our 2018 Stow Candidates Night. And if you would like to put your chair back in the container, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Good luck.
Thank you. You too.